Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my good friend and co-host, Scott Karasik. Today, we are recapping the Falcons' Week 1 win over the Chicago Bears, as well as previewing their upcoming matchup in Week 2 against the Green Bay Packers. And then we'll answer all you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show and throughout the show as well. So, Scott, as we often do start the show, we talk about any roster moves. Just sort of some house cleaning for the Falcons in the past week since we last did this air. They cut a couple of guys off the injured reserve and added a guy to the practice squad. They wound up cutting Matt Sims off injured reserve. Josh Keys was cut, I believe, yesterday off injured reserve. So those guys are sort of now free agents, and apparently their injuries weren't that serious. And the Falcons picked up Trevor Knight, the quarterback formerly of Texas A&M, Arizona Cardinals, and Oklahoma, to be their practice squad guy. They wound up cutting defensive tackle Tiny Tupu in order to make room for Mr. Knight. Any thoughts on these roster moves?
I mean, cutting guys off the injured reserve is pretty irrelevant. Like, cool, Matt Sims and Josh Keys are gone, whatever. It's nice to have Trevor Knight on the practice squad because you actually have a practice squad quarterback that can throw the ball effectively. I liked what I saw from him when he was with Arizona this past preseason, and I think he'd be a solid guy who can actually let these receivers run routes in practice. Outside of that, Tani Topu, he was okay, but I'm not losing any sleep over Falcons cutting him.
Fair enough. I think the one interesting thing about this is I think now that Matt Sims is off the injured reserve and presumably is because he doesn't have a major injury, in the event one of the Falcons' two quarterbacks on the roster gets hurt, either Matt Schaub or Matt Ryan, I don't think we'll see Trevor Knight get promoted from the practice squad to the roster. I think instead you'll probably see the Falcons re-sign Matt Sims, assuming he's going to be available and no one else is going to pick him up. I doubt they will. The Falcons had him on the practice squad last year, did not re-sign him immediately after the season. He basically went unsigned for 3 months before the Falcons brought him back. So I'm assuming if nobody wanted to bring him into camp as a third or fourth arm back in April or May, I highly doubt that somebody's going to want to scoop him up as one of their top two quarterbacks in September or October. So that's probably the only significant move. Maybe I guess maybe there's a possibility that if the Falcons had an injury at linebacker, they might try to bring back Josh Keys as well. Potentially there. He's still eligible for the practice squad, I guess. So that's something maybe that you can keep an eye on down the road. But other than that, nothing sort of groundbreaking or anything. Trevor Knight is okay. He's athletic, has a good arm. He can move around, make plays with his legs. If you're going to build an offense that utilizes a lot of read option and sort of play action bootlegs, I could understand why you would want to see him develop as a pocket quarterback. I think he's got a very, very, very long way to go. And, we'll see what happens. But I doubt we'll see Trevor Knight get any action with the Falcons this season. I think, if anything, this is a move to have a guy potentially with a little bit of a leg up going into 2018. All right, let's move on and let's talk about this Bears game, this Week 1 win. Falcons beat the Bears on the road 23-17. Got some last-second heroics from Mr. Brooks Reed and the defense finally stepping up, winning a game for the Falcons as opposed to having to rely on the offense. That defense was able to drop Mike Glennon 4 times for sacks, got 10 quarterback hits. That 10 mark, I think, is the highest number they've ever had or tied the highest they've ever had under Dan Quinn. 4 sacks is like the third best game they've had under Dan Quinn. So certainly a very strong start for the Falcons pass rush, going up against a decent Bears line. I know they had an injury to Kyle Long. The running game, however, for the Falcons did not really get going, had 20 carries for 53 yards. That's a 2.7 yards per carry average. The run defense had its hiccups, gave up 125 yards on the ground to Tariq Cohen and Jordan Howard on 19 carries, an average of 6.6 yards. A lot of that's sort of inflated by a 46-yard run by Cohen. But even still, even if you took that out, it's still averaging over 4 yards a carry. So not exactly a stingy sort of run defense. Scott, what were your thoughts on this first week game?
It was kind of ugly in a couple of aspects. It was not nice to see the run defense kind of get gashed. But when you go back and you actually look and see why they got gashed, the majority of it came on 3 plays because of missed tackles. There's an 11-yard run by Jordan Howard, and then Tariq Cohen had a 46-yard run and a 20-yard. That's 76 of those 125 yards that they got. It wasn't like they were regularly picking up 5, 6, 7 yards on the Falcons. It was 3 runs. They had 48 yards on 16 carries outside of that for 3 yards a carry. So basically limit the big play and Atlanta's run defense is right where you want to be. Outside of that, I think the Falcons' run offense, a lot of it had to do with they had a first-year starting right guard going against one of the better run-defending defensive lines. Eddie Goldman, Team Hicks, they're not crap players. I'll put it that way. They're really good football players. Showed that they were really good football players the entire time. And it didn't hurt that, Willie Young and Leonard Foote were playing their assignments. So I'm not happy with the performance, but I think that considering first week of the season, I can't complain too much about it. It's not like I'm sitting here going, oh, hey, they've got to fix this. They've got to replace that guy. They got to replace this. It's just they got to hit a little bit better. They got to get the run established. And I think going against a team like Pack front 7 is honestly kind of shitty in the middle. It'll help out. I'm not saying Mike Daniels is bad for Mike Daniels is excellent. The guy next to Mike Daniels. Kenny Clark.
Okay.
Clay Matthews is great. Not against the run, it's not yet. And, guys like Nick Perry is not against. So I think Atlanta should be able to set the tone. Where last week.
Okay. We'll see what happens. I think they do need to be able to run the ball effectively, given some of the pass protection issues they had on Sunday, particularly Wes Schweitzer at right guard. And I think the Packers will probably be – I think Kenny Clark usually lines up over the right guard, but I know they do like to move those guys around. So there will be opportunities for Mike Daniels to snatch his soul. And Mike Daniels is a much, much better player than Akeem Hicks, and Akeem Hicks is a very good football player. So that will be an interesting matchup this upcoming week. I think going back to the Bears game, I think for the most part, it was a solid performance. I know the offense didn't come out playing as strongly as I think a lot of people expected them to sort of pick up where 2016 left off. I think a lot of that is owed to sort of normal NFL Week 1 jitters in terms of, you look at a lot of the high-powered offenses in the league that have high-level quarterbacks. Typically, you saw this with Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers is another good prominent example. A lot of these teams with these high-level quarterbacks don't always come out fast in Week 1 because their offenses are built on timing and all these sorts of things, and it takes a while for them to sort of work their way into midseason form. Typically, when you see these sort of Week 1 monster games from quarterbacks, they often come from rookies. You go back to people like Mariota and RG3 and even Matt Ryan. Who is it like? Carson Wentz. Because it's usually because teams have a very sort of strict sort of game plan going into the week. We're going to do this. We're going to do this with this rookie in order to get him into the best spots. And with veterans, you tend to sort of, play it by ear a little bit. So I think that explains most of the struggle, or some of the struggles. I wouldn't say most of the struggles, some of the struggles. But I think the defense played well. It wasn't a dominant performance by them. They certainly were a bend but don't break. They got the key red zone stop at the end. It was basically the only red zone stop they had, but it was the one that was the most important one. So we'll take it. Austin Hooper had a really big game. Sort of was quiet for 3 quarters. Basically, had 0 targets, and then had 2 big catches in the fourth quarter, or really 3, but it was sort of nullified by a penalty. Again, Brooks Reed had 2 sacks in the game to lead the Falcons pass rush. There, Devontae Campbell had a good game, made a number of plays all over the field and whatnot. So a lot of good things going for the Falcons defense, and mostly positive performances on offense, just not necessarily the sort of one guy dominates on offense that we're sort of grown accustomed to seeing over the last year. So we'll see how things change for next week's game.
I think we're going to have a situation where every week there's going to be a different guy who comes out and just has that insane game. This week it was Austin Hooper. Maybe next week we see Devontae Freeman with 200 yards. Like, maybe the week after we'll see, Julio Jones with another 250-yard receiving game. And it's just going to be someone else going off each week. And it's like, how can you stop everybody?
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of how you want to, that's ideal. You want teams to not be able to sort of pin one guy down and say, okay, if we stop this guy, we stop the Falcons. Or, the opposite is true on defense. If we block this guy or we take this guy out of the game, then we can sort of do what we want on the Falcons defense and whatnot. So, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about we got a bunch of mailbag questions about this game specifically, and as we often do on this show, let's start off with a question from Evan Birchfield. He asks, "Who is your MVP of the Falcons-Bears game?"
Brooks Reed. Just 2 sacks, set the edge. He had a couple of tackles for loss. Maybe one was a tackle for like a no-yard gain, but basically I'm counting it as a tackle for loss because it was like 3rd and 2. And he got the guy right at the line, and he stopped it. So to me, that's a tackle for loss. Brooks Reed. He stopped 2 drives just with sacks. He stopped another drive with a tackle for loss. He got a first down tackle for loss on that final drive as well. He just was setting his edge. He was eating his blocks. He had a lapse here or there, but for the most part, he did his job. He played like the Brooks Reed we all wanted him to be this past game. If he could do that, maybe not, 2 sacks a game, but if he can do the whole getting the kind of pressure he got over and over and over again, I'll take that every.
Well, there has been a lot of talk this offseason about guys like Khalil Mack and Von Miller getting 30 sacks this year. So Brooks Reed is well on pace to get 30 sacks this year. So I think he can do it. I definitely think he can. No, kidding. Brooks Reed is definitely the obvious choice. I'll just change it up just because I can wax poetic about the greatness of Brooks Reed. But before I get to my pick, I just want to say, all those people that were saying let's cut Brooks Reed, the Falcons wouldn't be 1-0 without him. But I'll go with Austin Hooper because I don't think the offense gets the points that they get without him sort of providing the only real sort of explosive element in the game. They came sort of on broken plays, broken coverages, a blitz that the Falcons did a good job picking up. That 40-yard play was basically a blitz that the Falcons sort of made the Bears pay for. And those 2 big plays really sort of set up scores. Obviously, the 88-yard touchdown was a score itself, but then the 40-yard play also set up another score, and that was sort of what won the Falcons the game in from an offensive standpoint. So if you're picking an offensive MVP, it's definitely Austin Hooper. Defensively, I think Brooks Reed, certainly. The Falcons wouldn't have won the game without him. I know Campbell played a great game, and some other players did as well, but it all sort of boils down to the monster of the Midway, as some might say, Brooks Reed. Jalen Muhammad on Twitter asks, who was the hashtag bust of the week and why was it not Wes Schweitzer?
I'm going to say it was Wes Schweitzer.
And Evan Birchfield asks, I guess this is sort of a Wes Schweitzer related question. Evan Birchfield asks, how do you think Wes did in starting at right guard?
I think he looked like a guy who was playing his first 70 snaps in live NFL action against the guy who overmatched him with strength and technique and is probably going to have a breakout year this year if everything goes well and they stay healthy in Chicago. Akeem Hicks is a hell of a football player. He's been a hell of a football player, even in New Orleans. So when he went from New Orleans to New England in 2015, he was good there. When he went from New England to Chicago as a free agent, he was good. He's been good there. He signed a bigger contract this past offseason. I mean, there's really no reason for the Falcons to hold it against Wes Schweitzer that he had trouble with a guy who outweighs him by 30 pounds, is bigger, stronger, faster, pretty much in every way, and is just he's entering his sixth year, I want to say, and he's finally putting it all together on his end. Defensive tackles can take 5-6 years to get it, especially when they start out at 22 years old. So I'm not too worried about Wes Schweitzer having an issue against Akeem Hicks. I do think there's going to be – he's probably gotten his ass chewed out by Chris Morgan for it, but I think that we're going to see a little bit more improvement this week going against guys like Kenny Clark and Mike Daniels. Because Mike Daniels, despite being a lot quicker, is not as strong as Akeem Hicks.
Okay. All right. That's if I was picking a hashtag bust of the week, Jalen, you must seem to think Matt Chambers is on the show, but I would, if I had to pick someone that's not Wes Schweitzer, I guess it would have to be Steve Sarkisian, just because he did not live up to, I think, people's expectations. I don't think that's really fair to sort of single him out that way. But if to answer your question, I'll pick him. As far as Wes Schweitzer did, yeah, he struggled in his first NFL start. Not a surprise. I'm not going to necessarily prescribe to the theory that he'll get better as the year goes on, because even though Akeem Hicks is a hell of a football player, he's probably not even in the top 10 defensive tackles that Wes Schweitzer is going to face this year. When you have guys like, I think Mike Daniels, Marcel Darius, Kyle Williams, Sue, Leonard Williams, Mo Wilkerson, Kawan Short, Michael Bennett, Sheldon Richardson, Gerald McCoy, Linville Joseph. It's kind of a murderer's row of defensive tackles that he's going to face this year. And I think, if he can play, I think it's going to be a rough road ahead of him. I don't think he's going to get a week off. Maybe the Lions, and even then, I think he's going to be facing Haloti Ngata or something like that. So it's one of those things where that's not going to be an easy matchup, and that's probably the easiest matchup he has all year. Maybe the Cowboys with Stephen Paya, but even Stephen Paya is no joke either. So it's going to be a tough year for Wes Schweitzer, and I think people are going to just have to take it in stride. Hopefully he improves over the course of the season. Hopefully by week 17, we're not looking at him as a lost cause, similar to kind of how we looked at Peter Kahns many, many years ago after his first year as a starter, or really after his second year, I guess. But we'll see how it goes. This is not me trying to be critical of Wes Schweitzer. I don't really have high expectations for him, to be honest with you. So we'll see how it goes. And I hope he does his best. And I hope we're not spending every show talking about how poorly Wes Schweitzer played. And every week people are like, why aren't we benching Wes Schweitzer? Why can't we do all those sorts of things? So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, let's just hope he gets it together.
Jason at your boy J94 asks, should our run defense be a concern, or is it because Chicago's O-line is a top unit?
Oh, Chicago's offensive line is one of the best run blocking lines in the NFL. They're right up there with Dallas in terms of how they run block. They didn't have, Kyle Long on Sunday. So they played Grasso in his spot, and they didn't miss a beat. They looked just fine. They knocked around the Falcons O-line, or D-line in the run game. They just couldn't get it together as a as a pass blocking line. Also, the only real issue that they had was the big plays. So if they can get their tackling together, there won't be an issue.
Fair enough. I thought the run defense was better upon rewatch than it was watching it live. It was a little bit of a problem live, but I think watching it again, the Bears did gash the Falcons a couple of times, certainly a few more times than the Falcons certainly wanted them to. And I think it really sort of helped the Bears offense sort of get into a groove a little bit because they knew for most of the game they could rely on the running game to be effective. The Bears' offensive line is better than probably people think. Losing Kyle Long was a big loss, but I thought Tom Compton did a competent job filling in for him. I don't think the run defense is a huge concern right now. I think it should, I'll say, I think it should be a concern somewhat, but I don't think no one needs to panic because we gave up 125 yards to the Bears. But I do think it should be a concern really until we go up against a team like Dallas and really see what a potentially dominant running game can do against us. But every week I think teams are going to try to run the ball against us to sort of, help out their defenses and whatnot. So it's going to be a test every week, and we'll find out if the Falcons answer that test. But I'm reasonably confident that this week and probably the next week against Detroit that they'll look a lot better just because I don't have as much confidence in Green Bay or Detroit's running game as I did in Chicago's. Andy at Falcons Andy asks, what was the biggest reason for the issues running the ball, poor blocking / execution, or the Bears' strength at defensive line and linebacker?
Combination of both. Schweitzer, Schrader, they weren't looking great on the right side. Atlanta normally does a lot better on the right side than they have been. Also, they were running a lot more gap plays as opposed to pure outside zone. That didn't help anything. Outside of that, I don't really think there's that much that was different. But they did run a couple more gap plays than they normally would.
Yeah, I think it was poor blocking execution. Obviously, poor blocking and execution is due to the other team's players also playing well. So it is definitely a mix of both. But certainly I don't think the offensive line performed at a level that we have sort of grown accustomed to at various times the last year. Unlike other people, I don't think the offensive line was as much of a strength late in the last season as people like to pretend. I think early in the season they were certainly a dominant unit, but once we got to like that Seattle game, I think they had probably a healthy mix of bad games as well as good ones. So they looked a little bit more like the offensive line we saw in the second half of the season when in some of those games where they got their butts kicked like San Diego or Philadelphia. And so that is a concern. I don't want to see any more games like that. I think they need to step up. I think they'll have a fire lit under them this week, and so they know that they're going to need to do a better job against Green Bay if this offense wants to, start to get clicking. Jalen Muhammad also asked, any idea why True wasn't playing every snap?
No, honestly, I have no idea. I would have played True every snap I could to get him on the field.
Well, I checked, and he only missed 2 snaps. And I know one of the snaps he missed, they went to their 3 wide receiver sets because the Bears went to their 22 personnel. And they brought in Casey to play single high and brought Ricardo Allen up to play in the box. I don't remember the other play that True missed. I don't know if that was another snap where they went 3 safeties or there was another reason for it. So I can answer half that question, I guess, Jalen. So, Jason at your boy Jay asks, how do you guys think Duke Riley looked in his first real game?
I thought Duke looked good. Had a couple of issues, especially with his tackling, but I think once he gets everything together, he'll be fine. But I thought he looked a lot better than Devondre Campbell did last year starting.
I thought Duke looked fast. He played fast. You're right. He missed a couple of tackles. He blew a couple of assignments in coverage, or maybe not a couple. I can think of one towards the end of the game on that final drive he did. I can't recall another one off the top of my head. So it was a pretty normal debut for a rookie. You have some positive moments. You have some negative moments. Typically, the negative ones outweigh the positives. So. He'll be a work in progress. It doesn't look like he's going to come in and light the world on fire, but I'm sure there will be some games coming up where he'll be able to make a little bit more impact plays, show that speed, show that range, and maybe create some turnovers as well. So we'll see how it goes for him. All right, Scott, that's all our questions about the Bears. Let's move on and talk about this Week 2 matchup against the Packers. We've touched upon it a little bit. Both teams are 1-0. The Packers are just coming off a pretty sound win over the Seattle Seahawks. It was pretty tight for the first half of the game. I think it was like 3-3 at halftime or something like that. But then Packers pretty much controlled the game in the second half. And this is a rematch from the NFC Championship game, in case some of you guys were in a coma last January. And, I think the one big difference, at least I know Packer fans will certainly be talking about, is they're a lot healthier going into this game than they were going into the NFC Championship game. I'm curious, Scott, do you think it's going to make a big difference? I know the one major injury they have is Brian Bulaga. He's got an ankle. He missed last week. I don't know what his status is, so we'll say he's questionable at this point. But do you think the health of the Packers makes them a little bit more formidable now than they were then?
I mean, they're probably better than they were in the NFC title game, but I don't know if it's going to make that much of a difference just in general, because they still aren't great when it comes to their linebacker speed. They still aren't great. And the places Atlanta wins on offense, I don't know ways they can get them. The places Atlanta wins on defense, I think they match up well, because I don't think the Packers are great at run blocking and just lining up and running. And that's one way to beat this Falcons defense. I don't think they can do it. I don't mean to sound arrogant here. I don't think that the Packers are built that way. I think that Atlanta is built to take out a team like the Packers. I think they're built to take out a team like the Seahawks. I think they're built to take out a team like, Dallas. I don't think they're built to take out a team like the Bears, because the Bears are losing everything. So a team like the Bears is going to give them trouble, because Bears are built different. Maybe the Bears win 6-7 games this year, but I'm not too worried about the Packers in terms of talent matchup, because the players that they were missing, they got back and they performed terrible. Quentin Rollins, atrocious. Devon House looked back. He didn't allow catching 30 snaps because they were throwing it to everybody but Marius Randall. Kevin King's a rookie. He looked just okay. I'm more worried about their defensive line and the pass rush. Atlanta's forced to play from behind 2 touchdowns. I think it could end up being.
Okay. I am much more worried about this game than I was about the NFC Championship game, and I was reasonably worried about the NFC Championship game because I was scared of Aaron Rodgers since he was red hot at that point. I am. This is the point where I'll express my concern about the offense. I don't think this. I'm not confident. Let me rephrase that. I won't dismiss it out of hand, but I'm not confident that we're going to have the same offense in this game as we did last year, where that gave me some confidence that if we got into a shootout with the Packers, we could win that game. And so I do think this is going to be another game where the defense is going to have to step up, just because I don't know if the offense is going to give them a 31-0 cushion like they did last time. And so I think this is going to have to be a game where the defense, every yard, they're going to have to scrap and claw for it. I think the positive thing is, I do agree with you. I think the defense is sort of built to sort of handle a team like the Packers. It's really going to depend on the pass rush. If Balaga doesn't play, I think that's a huge boost for the Falcons. Kyle Murphy, I think, is the replacement right tackle. And I thought he did a decent job against Seattle, given some of their pass rushers. So it's not like he's bad or anything in my eyes. But I do think that's a matchup that Vic Beasley could really exploit this week. And that would really do a lot to help out the Falcons pass rush, because it's really just I'm confident our secondary can sort of match up with the Packers receivers. Now that True and Alford and Neal and all those guys are 100%, unlike they were back in January. I'm worried about Aaron Rodgers being able to scramble around, extend plays, and that's what they do. That's how they get their big plays. Is Rodgers is running around for 4 or 5 seconds, someone breaks open, and he just heaves it down the field, 40 yards down the field, and it's a big play. And that's the thing that scares me about the Packers. And it's really going to be up on the Falcons' defensive line, I think, to really sort of control the line of scrimmage and not allow Aaron Rodgers to get outside the tackles and do his thing as he's often able to do. And if they can do that, I certainly think whatever version of the Falcons offense shows up, whether it's the good one or the mediocre one, I think they'll be in a position to win the game in the end. But if the defense can't do that and the Falcons are put in a situation where they're going to have to, win a 35-34 game with Green Bay, I'm not as confident going into this game that they can do that as I would have been back at the end of January last year. So that, to me, is going to be an issue that we're going to have to see how it plays out. Another key I want to point out before we get to Evan Birchfield's question, I think another area and that sort of mixes into what I was just talking about is going to be the red zone. And I think that's going to be the key for the Falcons offensively. They have to get conversions in the red zone. They were 1 for 3 this past week against Chicago. I don't think they can afford to do that against Green Bay, just because Green Bay, unlike Chicago has a ceiling in terms of what their offense can do. We knew that they weren't going to put up 30 points. Green Bay could potentially put up 30 points on this defense if we're not careful. So the Falcons have to capitalize on every red zone opportunity they get. So if they get 3 opportunities, they better go 3 for 3. And so that's going to be something to keep an eye on this week. So we'll see how it works out for them as well. Evan Birchfield asked, comparing the matchup again. Okay, we just answered this question. Sorry, I need to read these things ahead of time. Scott, you got any other thoughts on sort of any key matchups or anything you're looking forward to seeing this week?
I guess for me, the big matchup is going to be the Falcons pass rush versus that offensive line, seeing how they really attack it, especially up the middle. I know that the Packers tend to have really good offensive linemen in the middle, good guards, good centers, but I don't think that they've got the kind of guys that can really handle a lot of strength heads up. We saw Corey Linsley get kind of thrown around last year by Hageman. I'd love to see what happens when Poe gets him. We've got Lane Taylor, who was having trouble with Hageman, and then who was it last year? Long or Lang? TJ Lang. He had trouble with Grady Jarrett on the inside in that playoff game, and I'm really wondering if Jari Evans is going to have a repeat of what happened back in 2014 when Hageman was a rookie and just threw him around. I think we're going to see Grady Jarrett throw him around quite a bit.
Okay, fair enough. We have a new segment on the show. If you missed last week's show, it's called Call Outs of the Week. If you're old school listeners of the show, it used to be at the end of the show, I would let Scott have a microphone and go on a rant for whatever he wanted to do. It's basically what this sort of a thing is. But now I get the rants occasionally. So I'll go first and pick who I'm calling out. I'm going to call out the Falcons fan base, but not in the way you think. I think, and I'm calling out myself as well. I think the thing we're going to have trouble doing with all year, and you can tell by some of the questions that we've had tonight, and I think we'll continue to see as we get further into the mailbag, is we're going to have a difficulty separating 2016 and 2017. And I think something needs to happen in order for us to sort of shock us out of our system. And we saw that back in 2012 and 2013. And that thing that didn't shock us out of our system to understand that, oh, this is a different year. This is not a continuation of the previous year. Unfortunately, in 2013, that was Julio Jones getting hurt. I hope it's not that dramatic, but it is one of those things like we do need to understand at a certain point that this is a brand new year, and sort of the constant back and forth of how does this compare to last year? How does this compare to last year? What does this compare to this? We're going to have to stop doing that at a certain point. I know it's still early, and I don't realistically expect any of us, and I'm doing it myself. So I'm not necessarily holding everybody as I'm pointing the finger at myself as well. So I'm calling out the fan base. We do need to realize it's 2017 and no longer 2016. So that's my call out. Scott, who are you calling out this week?
I'm going to call out the offensive line as a whole. I know Alex Mack had a solid game, but I think when you're dealing with a good offensive line and against a good defensive line, you have to create holes in the running game. And Schweitzer didn't do that. Mack was just okay. Schrader was not looking good in the run game. The left side would work a little bit, and then Levitri would hold somebody, or Mack would get called for a hold. So it's just that's what I would call out. I'm tired of seeing bad blocking against good defensive lines. I'd love to see just once them just dominate a good defensive line and people go, oh, wow, this Falcons team is even better than we thought.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the mailbag questions. Our first one comes from Big Boy Brewski at Bruce Luan. He asks, being still early, how is this week one compared to last week's week one?
I mean,
last year's week one.
I mean, last year Atlanta lost 31. This year they won. Touchdowns. This year they back and just watching pass rushes there.
All right, Scott, you're cutting out a little bit, so I'll pick it up from here. Yeah, I think, I just ranted about this, but I don't know. I think the whole idea that a lot of people are saying, well, last year we struggled in week one, and so the offense got it together. So this year's week one struggles, that means we'll get it together again this year. I don't think that really makes any sense because, again, what I said, like every season is different. Like I can't compare this year's week one performance any more to last year's week one performance than I can this year's week one performance to 2007's week one performance. It's not the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison. And the idea that just because it went a certain way last year means it's going to go this way this year is sort of ridiculous. It could, like, again, I'm not saying it won't, but it probably won't. So we'll see how it goes. This year is going to be a different year. It'll have different issues, different things that the Falcons will have to overcome. And you just can't just sort of say, oh, well, it was fine after week one last year. It's going to definitely be fine after week one this year. We'll see. And again, I don't mean to paint that as a doom and gloom or anything like that. I think, as I said, you just got to start looking at the seasons as a completely different animal and a different beast that you got to slay, as opposed to, well, it's just an extension of 2016. And on that note, we got a similar question from Luez Abraham. Last year's week one game is comparable to last week's week one. Missed tackles, penalties, O-line issues, not too many big plays. Wrong or right?
I'd have to agree. It wasn't too different. Basically, Atlanta needs to stop starting the season slow and just clean it up.
Okay. You're not wrong. I mean, you're right, but again, I don't think it matters. that's a different team that we played. That was a different Falcons team. The Bucks, the Falcons. None of those things are the same. They have the same uniforms. They have some of the same players, but they're not the same thing. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. All right. Nice troll job, Swift. Swift Hitters' question is, will A.J. McCarron lead the Bengals to a Super Bowl before Matt Ryan leads the Falcons to one? Hashtag AJ future is near.
I refuse to answer questions by Swift.
No, because A.J. McCarron is not going to be on the Bengals in the near future. So, no. Evan Birchfield asked, now that we've finally seen a real game, can you compare Sark's offense to what we saw last year? Similarities or differences?
We need more than just, 50 snaps to really get a good comp. You need at least 200 snaps of total offense to really make the one-to-one comparison from last year to this year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, but that's not going to stop me, Scott. So I'm going to do it because whatever Evan asks, I will answer. The similarities, personnel-wise, the similarities are the same, or pretty much the same. They did use a lot more 2 tight ends. They used a lot more 3 wide receivers, or not a lot more, a little more 3 wide receivers. A lot less fullback than they did last year. Other than that, I don't know if there was too many similarities other than just the general same players. You didn't see sort of the same usage of route combinations that we saw throughout most of 2016. I don't think they really utilized Julio Jones. You didn't see as much play action. You did not see many sort of designed shot plays down the field with vertical routes. So that would be the comparison I would make. We'll see, again, if you just randomly picked one 2016 game and compared it to one, the previous years or any year's offense, you could very easily find a lot of discrepancies. So, who knows if this week 1 performance is going to be the thing that, as Scott said, colors the entire season, and that's what we're going to see consistently on a weekly basis. But I think there's more differences than there are similarities. This, to me, watching this Falcons offense was, to me, a much more reminiscent of the Cutter Falcons offense than the Kyle Shanahan Falcons offense, at least in general flavor. So that's what I would say. Luez Abraham asked, do you think we see a real different offense in week 2 than we see in week 1?
I don't think it's going to be that different in week 2. I think we might see a couple more shots, a little bit more play action, because I think they'll get what they really want to get established down. And I think that was the real issue with it this past week, is they couldn't get everything they wanted established. I think we'll see more play action. I think we'll see a little bit more shot plays. I don't know if it's going to be night and day difference, but I think we'll see an increase in some of those areas to try to dial up a couple of more explosive plays in the passing game. Andy asked, do you think the lack of deep shots was Sark trying to be careful in his first game or indicative of his style going forward? I think it was him being careful in his first game. I don't think it's his first game in Atlanta with the Falcons, with this group of personnel. He doesn't really know what he has 100%. So I think he was just taking a chance and seeing what he had, and didn't do a lot of shot plays because he didn't need to. I feel like when you've got a good lead, and Atlanta was never losing at any point in this game. I think a lot of people forget that. They scored the first field goal. They scored the first touchdown. They were tied 10-10 at the half, and then busted it open to 20-10, and then held on 23-17. At a certain point, the Falcons were fine. They were completely fine. I'd say once they scored that Austin Hooper touchdown, that was the nail in the coffin, because the Bears had no chance. The Bears could have come back from it, but they didn't. I think the defense finally held up the way that they should have, and that's going to be a big difference this year. So, will we see more shots? Yeah. I think that it had anything to do with him this first week? Like, I'm not worried about this first week because Kyle Shanahan's first game, Atlanta looked good and bad. Matt Ryan threw for 2 picks. Like, it's the first week of a new offense. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be gravy. We've still got some feeling out to go. I mean, Atlanta won 26-24 with Shanahan's first game. Matt Ryan threw 2 picks and 2 touchdowns.
Okay. Surprise, surprise. I'm going to disagree with Scott. I think I can't imagine why it would be him trying to be careful. He's had 9 months to prepare, or no, 7 months to prepare for this game. So, like, to me, when you it's interesting that you mentioned Kyle Shanahan, Scott, because when you go back and look at that Eagles game in 2015, that game was very indicative of his sort of style. A lot of play action. They took some shots with Julio. They really sort of tailored the offense around Julio Jones. And so, to me, like, the idea that you, with 7 months of prep, knowing that you were going to play, you didn't know you were going to play the Bears until April, but you basically had 4 or 5 months to prepare specifically for this game. The idea that you would just sort of go into it without a strong plan, or you would just play it tentatively, I don't really buy that at all. I think I think this game was indicative of his style. Now, whether that's his style going forward, we'll see, because I do think Dan Quinn has a considerable amount of input on the offense, and if he wants Sark to change up his style, then Sark will change up his style, or he won't be calling plays for the Falcons in the very near future. So it's one of those things where I don't necessarily know if this is going to be our offense for the entirety of 2017, but I don't think you can say, oh, well, he was just playing conservative. Like, why would he play conservative? The Falcons knew exactly who they were facing. They've known this for 4 months. Like, why would you go into this game not having a plan, being like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, this is what I want to do. So I think that's exactly what they did.
I think the plan wasn't to have a ton of shots, though, because that's not how you beat the Bears. I don't think taking a ton of shots downfield is going to give you the completions and have the offense move the way that you need it to move to beat the Bears. Now, it's how you beat the Packers. Like I said, give us more than just 50 plays to get a good read of this offense and really see what's going on.
I like your second point. I don't quite agree with you. I think being explosive beats every team. I don't think you purposefully say, oh, no, we can't be explosive against, like, I mean, sure, if he was concerned about the pass protection and so he wanted to get the ball out quickly, I could understand that. But going back and looking at the game, I don't think that was really what the strategy was. I think it was just a lot of sort of conservative play calling. And I think maybe that was a defined reaction to what the Falcons did in their last game. So that may have been the plan all along. It was like, we're going to take it slow. We're going to not rush out there. And again, yeah, I guess that technically means they were trying to be careful, but I also think that means if that's the case, that was their style. So, their style is careful. So I don't think this is necessarily a game that we can just say, oh, they just specifically wanted to be super conservative going into week 1, and they're going to open up the offense, every game moving forward. Again, they certainly might, but I don't think we can just simply look at this game as a one-off when you had 4 or 5 months to really prepare for it. So we'll see. Your homie Brian asked, do you think the Falcons are better off with Sarkisian than Shanahan this season, considering a lot of the people were mad at Super Bowl 51 play callers?
I think it's a little too early to tell. I prefer Sarkisian because I think he's going to work with the players a little bit more, but I don't know what's going to actually happen on the field. So if Sarkisian, we're saying, hey, he's going to work with players more, and then it ends up not working out, and it doesn't look as good, then you got to go Shanahan as a big fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to pick Shanahan to answer this question specifically. I don't see a reality where getting a new offensive coordinator is going to help the team this season, especially one that doesn't have the experience. And I know it sounds like I'm being super, super critical of Sark. I'm not really that critical of Sark. I'm fine with what he's doing. I just think, I don't know. I think we'll have to see how things play out. But it is one of those things where I understand people's criticisms of him, and I do think there are legitimate things that the Falcons are going to have to try and fix moving forward, because if this is this type of offense that they're going to play all year long, this offense is not going to get this team back to the Super Bowl. It's just not. You can't win in the postseason without being explosive. If you're going to face teams like Green Bay, Seattle, Minnesota, Tampa Bay, Dallas, you're going to have to be able to generate big plays generally at will. And there's a strong correlation between the teams that make it far in the postseason and those that can be explosive. The only reason Joe Flacco has a Super Bowl ring is because the Ravens' offense was very explosive. Main reason why Eli Manning has 2 Super Bowl rings is because the Giants, in January, all of a sudden he starts slinging the ball all over the yard. So I do think the Falcons are going to have to work towards that. The positive thing is a lot of teams struggle in week 1. You can build towards that. No one's expecting you to come out of the gates, hitting the ground running in week 1. But I do think that's something that the Falcons are going to definitely have to work on. And, this week's game simply isn't going to cut it long term. For now, it's fine. But we'll have to keep building towards something later this season. So that's why, if I sound overly critical of Sark, that's because that's in my head, not necessarily because I'm disappointed with his play calling from week 1. It's just we got to build towards something else. Falcons Furies at South Life Gold. Where were those Julio red zone targets we were promised? Sark better get it together. I got a family to feed and fantasy to play, LOL.
I think we're kind of overdoing it on whether we think Sark was going to actually get Julio those targets right away. Now, Atlanta was only 1 of 3 in the red zone, and I think that's part of the issue. I think if the offense scores 2 more touchdowns as opposed to 2 more field goals, we have a different taste in our mouth from this game, and we're looking at a 31-17 win, and people go, all right, well, the Falcons won 31-17. We're cool here. And Julio Jones scored 2 red zone touchdowns. Everybody feels different. I think they need to add more targets. I think they need to give a lot more targets for the Falcons. For the Falcons' best player, period, Julio Jones. Get him the ball. Get him some screens. Get him some slants. It was 1st and goal at the 8, I want to say, at one point. And Atlanta ran a play, and it was a slant to who was it? It was a slant to Sanu with an underneath route by Freeman called. And I'm sitting here like, Sanu's wide open outside of the safety coming over. If that's Julio, Ryan's throwing it there and just letting him beast through the safety. And I saw that play, and I was like, what in the world is he doing? He winds up checking it down to Freeman for no gain. And I think that's kind of the difference that needs to happen in the offense. Those kind of plays need to have Julio running those back. There was also another play where it was like from the 18-yard line, and Taylor Gabriel ran it out Julio Jones. Same time, you got to think, you know what? I'm not going to target Taylor Gabriel. And something like that, I would have had Gabriel.
Okay, your mic cut out a little bit there, Scott, so I didn't really catch that last part, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. As the answer to the question, I don't know. I don't necessarily expect to see Julio get a ton of red zone targets. Certainly not necessarily like league leading number. like sort of what we saw with Des Bryant a couple of years ago. I think they'll certainly get him more involved. Again, every game, the good thing about the NFL is the coaches know the things that they didn't do wrong. So we sit here on shows like this and we nitpick and we criticize. Like they're well aware of it. It's really a question of, can they go out and say, okay, we didn't do this thing right. This week we're going to game plan and we're going to do it right. And so that's really what makes the difference between good coaching and not so good coaching in the NFL. And I'm confident our coaching staff will get it together. And so I do think we'll see some of these things shift and change and hopefully it'll all work out and you'll be able to feed your family and get those fantasy points as well. Andy asks, what did you see from Taylor Gabriel? Do you think he will be used less as a gadget player? I hate the term, as he was much more this year.
I think he'll be way more than a gadget player. Way more than just a gadget player. He's a way better football player than anybody's given him credit for. He can run that underneath post. He can run that slant. You can take a slant for 10 minutes, or you can take a 10-yard slant and turn it into a 80-yard gain, just like Julio Jones can. So, yeah, I'm not calling him a gadget player. I think he's way more than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be one of the interesting things I see. Like, based off of the first game, again, as we said, it's hard to sort of extrapolate too much from one game to the whole season. But it didn't look like they were trying to use him as a gadget player in that week when they were trying to use him as a regular, quote unquote, boring wide receiver. He was running all the same routes that you would expect him to run. I think they'll try to get him. There certainly will be opportunities for him to be used like a gadget player in terms of screens and reverses and jet sweeps and all those sorts of things. I think they will certainly get him involved in that way as well. But I don't think that's going to be only what he is. And to me, the big difference is because when you go back and you look at how Kyle Shanahan used him both in Cleveland and in Atlanta, and how I think wasn't it Darryl Loggins, who's the Bears offensive coordinator, who replaced Shanahan in 2015, I think. I could be wrong about that. But the mistake that Loggins made was he basically just used him as most teams often look at these undersized 5'8", fast wide receivers and say, oh, he's a slot receiver. And they just basically used him in the same way that New England uses someone like Danny Amendola or Miami uses Jarvis Landry, which is we're going to throw short passes to him and let him make plays after the catch, which obviously Gabriel, we know he can do that. But if that's the only way you use him, the genius of Kyle Shanahan is that he, this guy runs a 4.29. Let's send him deep. Let's allow him to make plays down the field. And that was really why, Gabriel exploded last year and was key to the Falcons' offense taking that leap. He was the number one DVOA rated wide receiver in the NFL, ahead of Julio Jones, who was number 2. And, when you go and look at Gabriel's vertical production, it was off the charts. It was just amazing. And so you got to use him down the field. You got to give him opportunities to make plays down the field. That's what makes him special. That's what makes this offense special. So, I'm confident Sark is aware of that. It's just a question of whether or not he can, implement it as effectively. I don't think it will be as effective as last year. I don't think, we'll see back-to-back years with Gabriel's number 1 in efficiency, but I certainly think we should be able to see a lot of him making a lot of strong plays down the field and really helping out this offense.
You're right about how the Falcons weren't as explosive compared to last year's pace. Last year they had 105 explosive plays, and I've got that through their first playoff game, through their second playoff game. So through 18 games, so 105 over 18 is 5.8 per game. They only had 4 this past week. But last year, as far as explosive plays go, they only had 4 in the opener. They had Mohamed Sanu with 59 yards, Tevin Coleman for 47, Julio Jones for 25, and then Tevin Coleman again for 21. So this year you got Hooper with those 2 big plays, and Julio Jones with a 25-yard catch, and then Tevin Coleman for 21. So, Last year we were saying the same thing about Julio Jones after that first week, where it was like, hey, what's going on? We got to get him more targets. We got to get. I'm seeing a pattern here, and I hope that it does follow a similar stretch to what last year was like.
Fair point, Scott. I would only point out, as I always do, play devil's advocate. I think the difference is, we knew already with Shanahan's offense that it was designed to get big plays because we saw that the previous year, particularly early in the season. And one of the differences that we did not see this past week, we did not see the play action, which is sort of what it's a big part of the explosiveness and being able to dial up shot plays by sucking up those linebackers and getting them and finding room behind them and underneath the safety for those big explosive plays. I think we only had 5. I could have miscounted a couple of plays and missed a couple there, but it was in single digits how many play action passes we had.
It's because the run game wasn't hitting.
Okay.
No, I think they should run more play action. I agree with you. Play action is definitely the bread and butter, definitely what they do best. But I think the reason why they wouldn't have done it is because of it.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I don't think not being able to run the ball is especially for this offense. We are well established in this league that we can run the football. So it certainly wasn't as if the Bears weren't bringing guys up into the box, and So I get what you're saying, but I don't think that's really a good excuse. And the other thing I was just going to say is we need to see more vertical routes. And when we see those and we see more play action, I do think we'll get to that explosiveness level that we need to get to. So that to me is the thing that, it's hard to be explosive when you're not asking your receivers to run more than 12 yards down the field. And I think it's made even harder when you're not when the play action is going to be an afterthought, like it was sometimes. Again, that's one of the reasons why I compared it to the Malarkey Cutter years, because a couple of those years you saw the Falcons only run play action like 13% of the time, when last year it was 27%, and I think in 2015 it was like 23, 24% or something like that. That number needs to be 20%. At least 1 in 5 passes need to be play action passes. That's the bottom line. And so that, if anything, that Sark's going to change, that to me is the one thing that I would be adamant about, that they really need to dial up more play action. And if he does that, then I feel like things will start to click and fall into place. If he doesn't, then I'm not that confident. So we'll see what happens. Jalen's last question is the defense # coming together?
Yes.
For the first time ever, I will say yes, I think so. So, yeah.
And the thing is, it's still not fully put together. Just to give y'all some feel. It's not fully put together because Tack still hasn't done anything.
Yes, I agree with you. It's still a work in progress, but it's at least coming together. Like, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think we were still a little bit in darkness last year. You would see some flashes every now and then, but I think you can definitely see, the eye is on the prize. So I think we're getting there. So, yes. All right. I think our last question comes from South Life Gold. Will Hooper get more targets? In parentheses, he probably should.
Yeah, he probably should. I think we're going to see him get like 6 or 7 targets a game moving forward. And whether he turns those into catches or not, whatever. But I think he'll probably average 3 to 4 catches a game through the rest of the season, which puts him right about 60 catches, 55, 60 catches, like I predicted at the beginning of the season. I think that's about where he's going to finish, that 50 to 60 range. I think he's going to finish at about 650 yards, even still, and I think he's going to finish at 6 touchdowns. And if he beats all 3 of those numbers, thank God, because Atlanta needs a tight end, and they need Tony Gonzalez retired.
Yes, I think we will see more than 2 targets for Austin Hooper in the future weeks. Clearly, South Life Gold, you are all about who's going to help out your fantasy team. So I understand where you're coming from. I think you can't help but imagine that Hooper's going to be a regular. They're going to try to get him a couple of opportunities every game now, based off of that first week's action. I think some of a lot of it was sort of not necessarily by design, but just sort of like, a blown coverage here and he's wide open down the field for a touchdown. And then another one, the other 40-yard play where it was a blitz. And so the Bears basically, he was the one guy they left uncovered and he sort of benefited from that. But I think, now that you've seen him do those things, you're going to, as a play caller, I think Sark will definitely add a couple of plays that are like, okay, now this is the point in the game where we need to get Hooper the ball and see what he can do and see if he can make some magic happen again. And I think he'll wind up outperforming, I think, what my projections were. I think it was like 50-something catches and 600, 700 yards or something like that. Now he's basically, I think all he has to really do, now that he started off with a 128-yard game, he's got to get, 40 yards a game or something like that, and he'll blow that wide out the water or something like that. So, I think he'll be fine. All right, guys, that's it. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you are curious about the Ricardo Allen interview, Scott was dealing with some other stuff, so he couldn't join me on that. I sort of held down the fort myself, talked to Rico, got some questions, his thoughts on the Bears game, the upcoming game, what his favorite candy is. So check that out. You can find that on iTunes. If you're curious where the links are to iTunes, you can find that all at profootballcentral.com. You can also find it posted on Facebook Live on our page, Falcons Central Radio. Also on YouTube under the Pro Football Central channel as well. Please subscribe to all of those things. Give us a like, a thumbs up, all that stuff. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. The show's Twitter handle is FalconsPFC. If you want to get your questions answered for next week's mailbag, please use the hashtag FalconsMailbag or tweet at us or the show, and we will get you on the docket. So have a good week, guys. Hopefully the offense will step up this week against the Packers. Hopefully the defense will continue to come together, and we'll be talking about a win on next Tuesday show.